I've been slowly meandering my way through the Mario RPG series, both Mario & Luigi and Paper Mario, over the past few years on the channel. I think that what's been interesting about covering them is that a lot of the very early Mario RPG games I didn't really grow up playing as a kid, as a lot of those games like Paper Mario or The Thousand Year Door I didn't really play until late into high school. But my vantage point is a little bit different with the games in the era of what we're talking about today, games like Partners in Time, Bowser's Inside Story, Super Paper Mario. These were the games that I knew it was going to be very interesting to come back to because I didn't know how much of my positive views on these games came from a rose-tinted point of view, or maybe they really are just that good. And no game was I more excited to come back to and replay than Mario & Luigi Partners in Time. It's always kind of been the awkward middle child released between Superstar Saga and Bowser's Inside Story, which are generally considered the two best Mario & Luigi games. The tone of Partners in Time is different, a lot of the gameplay mechanics of Partners in Time is different, and all of that I'll kind of touch on in this video. So just in case if anyone is unfamiliar though, and this is the first time they're ever hearing about a Mario RPG game, I'll do a very quick little bit of background and context. So the Mario RPG series started on the Super Nintendo with Super Mario RPG, which is a joint collaboration between Nintendo and Square Enix. It is still very much beloved to this day, and in fact if you want a modern lens to try this game out, then maybe consider the Super Mario RPG remake on the Switch, which adds a lot of quality of life features and makes the game generally a little bit easier compared to the original. But yeah, it takes a lot of those standard tropes from turn-based RPGs, but you know, adds a lot of Mario flair to it and even some unique characters as well, such as Mallow and Geno. The writing was very funny and quirky, and there were a lot of very memorable boss fights as well. That's just generally the main things that comes to mind whenever I think about Super Mario RPG. Anyway, after that though, the Mario RPG series split into two, with Paper Mario and Mario & Luigi. Generally speaking, the Paper Mario games were the home console games, except for Sticker Star, but we don't talk about that one. Generally speaking, the main difference between Paper Mario and Mario & Luigi is that Paper Mario games were a little bit more slow-paced, built around small numbers in combat that meant that you could really meticulously plan attacks way ahead of time. Much of the game was built around badges that meant that you were able to have a ton of agency in exactly what playstyle you were wanting to go with. In comparison, Mario & Luigi games were generally a little bit more fast-paced and action-heavy, especially whenever it came to combat. Not to mention the fact that you were literally controlling both brothers, and especially whenever it comes to overworlds, that generally led to a ton of puzzle solving. So with that being said, how does Partners in Time stack up as a Mario & Luigi game? First, I'll talk about it in terms of story and writing, and then I'll move into the more gameplay focused areas of the game. Essentially, the main synopsis of what's going on is that Mario and Luigi are having to go both past and present in order to stop an invasion by the Shroobs who have kidnapped Peach using the power of the Cobalt Star. Now, is it a story that's going to be as deep and complex as something like Super Paper Mario with its tale of love, for example? Not necessarily. But that does lead me to the first major strong suit of Partners in Time for me personally, something I remembered as a kid and definitely still stands true to this day, and that is the tone and atmosphere. This is really the main thing that sets this apart, both from Superstar Saga before and Bowser's Inside Story after, is that this is a really dark and gritty feeling game. Now, not in terms of writing, this is still just as goofy as any other Mario & Luigi game that you would find. No, what I'm referring to is the color palette and the music, mainly. A lot of the areas in this game, maybe Toadwood Forest or Vim Factory for example, have these very foreboding set pieces and a very dark and muddy color palette that really just gives it an atmosphere that isn't really captured in any other Mario & Luigi game, at least the ones that I've played. Now, they don't fully dive into this in terms of the actual story or writing, to be honest, aside from scary aliens who speak a language that you don't understand. However, even with that, I think that it just makes a lot of these areas a little bit more memorable. And that is perfectly complemented by the music. A lot of my favorite moments from this game were playing, like I just mentioned, Vim Factory, or maybe Shroob Castle at the end of the game, for example, or Toad Town. A lot of these very ominous and eerie pieces of the soundtrack that go a long way for establishing that atmosphere. In terms of the writing itself, it's definitely serviceable, much like any other Mario & Luigi game that you'll play. There's a lot of very funny and goofy moments between characters, but with that being said, I do feel like it's overshadowed by both Superstar Saga and Bowser's Inside Story in this regard. For one thing, there isn't really any major memorable characters from this game in the same way that we had, say, Prince Peasley and Cackletta from Superstar Saga, or how we have Fawful and Midbis and Starlo from Bowser's Inside Story. Of course, course, the main reason for that is because, like I said, the villains in this game don't speak an intelligible language that you are able to understand. On the one hand, that is kind of cool because it kind of makes them creepy in a way where you just see Princess Shroob speaking a bunch of gibberish and you don't know what it's saying, but all you do know is that it's very scary and foreboding. And by the way, I'm not saying I don't like Princess Shroob. I remember as a kid, she actually scared me and I really wanted to defeat her. No, rather what I'm saying is that there just isn't really a star of the show of a character that every single time they pop up, I can't wait to see what they're gonna say because I just know it's gonna knock my shoes off and make me start laughing or anything like that. There were definitely individual scenes that I found funny. For example, I thought that whenever Bowser Jr. had his discourse with the brothers on Yoshi's Island, there were some funny moments there. I like Luigi's interactions with the babies. There just definitely was not the same level of exceptional moments like there are in the games that sandwich this game, like Superstar Saga and Bowser's Inside Story. But overall, in terms of writing and story, I would say this game does the job. It may not be as strong as the games that precede and succeeded from what I've played, but I still did enjoy it, and I definitely wouldn't say that it's bad in that regard. But let's talk about gameplay. This is unfortunately kind of where this game falters. And because I'm about to be pretty negative, I want to really preface this by saying I still do like this game. Despite what I'm about to say, I still overall had a fun time playing through the game. However, there is just a lot that I didn't like. First of all, it's something that I never even really picked up on as a kid because I think whenever I was a kid, I was just much less critical of the games I was playing, but the prologue of this game is atrocious. Now, apparently Mario and Luigi Dream Team's prologue is even worse. I have not played that game yet, so I can't comment on it. All I do know is that Partners in Time takes a really long time to get going. Now, the game starts off in a relatively typical way for a Mario and Luigi game. It teaches you the basics of how to battle with both the babies and Mario and Luigi, but the amount of dialogue and stopping after this point and how long it takes is just so annoying, and honestly, it kind of makes repeat playthroughs of this game kind of obnoxious. But once again, I'm not gonna say an entire game sucks because the prologue sucks. I mean, by that logic, I would be saying the original Paper Mario sucks because that game also had a bad prologue. Beyond the prologue though, there's a lot of very bizarre changes that they made to the formula. For example, the Bros attacks. Normally in the Mario and Luigi games, the Bros attacks follow an SP system. Essentially, you have an amount of SP that's similar to your HP and you refill it by drinking syrup. Different Bros attacks would have different amounts of SP that's required to use them, which requires the player to be incredibly mindful about which ones they use in which circumstances. In Partners in Time, they very bizarrely changed it to a stock system. So essentially you go to an item shop and you just buy however much of a specific Bros attack you want, and then you just use them until you run out or buy more. The thing though is that there was not a single time in my playthrough where I ever really even came that close to running out of any given Bros attack, mainly because I really only cycle between like 3 or 4 of them, which meant that I was able to just completely stock up on those specific Bros attacks and then use them haphazardly. And you probably will be wanting to use them a lot because another problem with this game is that the enemies have way too much health. A lot of the enemies and bosses in this game aren't really interesting enough to warrant the amount of time that you're going to be spending fighting them, especially the boss fights. That isn't to say that there isn't any good boss fights. There definitely are some fun ones, but there's a lot that just take a very long time to go through. And I think another reason why this increased amount of health for the enemies and bosses annoyed me more is because they also made it so action commands are relatively easier to time. This makes it so battles generally require less focus than it did in Superstar Saga because, well, it's easier to just kind of click A and time your action commands without as much required amount of precision. So whenever you pair that with the added amount of time it takes to actually beat enemies, it ends up causing battles to feel a little bit more repetitive, stale, and monotonous. Another difference between this game and both Superstar Saga and Bowser's Inside Story is that the world doesn't really feel interconnected in the same way. Now, of course, none of these games are open world in the sense where you can just tackle any objective at any given time at your own leisure. But with Superstar Saga, the entire world did feel like one cohesive unit. You had, say, the Woohoo University, you had the mountains, you had the Teehee Valley, you had everything that did feel like it was a part of the same general literal location. But with Partners in Time, you're just kind of in Peach's castle as a hub area, then you just jump into a time portal, and then now you're in a specific area in the past. You complete a little obstacle puzzle course, and then you fight a boss, and then you get a piece of the Cobalt Star, and then rinse and repeat. Now, the game does have a map that implies that everything exists in the same cohesive world, but it definitely does not feel like it. In fact, a lot of the time whenever you went to the past to a specific location, it doesn't even really feel like you're in the past in a meaningful way, because you aren't also seeing these places in the present to add a juxtaposition. So this makes it so whenever I'm playing the game, I kind of subconsciously forget that I'm time traveling until a character reminds me, or I see a set piece that reminds me that I'm in the past, because I don't really have anything meaningful to keep me invested in that whole mechanic. That isn't to say that there isn't ever anything that they do meaningfully with the time travel mechanic. I think that there are some very clever character interactions. For example, at one point you have the older version of Egad kind of talking telepathically to the modern day Egad, which, by the way, Professor Egad is in this game. That's cool. But what I'm trying to say is that it's not a mechanic that I find nearly as enthralling as, say, Bowser's Inside Story, with the incredibly funny interactions that Starlo has from inside of Bowser. Finally though, let's talk about the babies. This is of course another primary gimmick of this game. Because you are going to the past, you are interacting with the younger versions of both Mario and Luigi, and I actually do generally like this. Particularly whenever it comes to the overworld puzzle solving, I find that a lot of the time the game will have you separated between Mario and Luigi and Baby Mario and Baby Luigi, and this does create some interesting moments. For example, whenever you're in Toad Town, the game has them completely separated as you have to meander your way through relatively difficult enemies on their own, and that is an interesting way to mix up the gameplay. With that being said, a lot of the time the puzzles that you do solve are relatively surface level. For example, the game may have you throw Baby Mario and Baby Luigi into a little hole to do some kind of puzzle. That's fun. But the game has you do that a lot of times, and it slowly starts to lose its luster. Not saying that this is anything egregious, I still had fun during these sections, but it's just something I wanted to throw in. Overall, I still like Mario and Luigi Partners in Time, and the elements that I do enjoy about it do enough to still make the experience memorable enough and hold it on its own compared to the other Mario and Luigi games. I think it's just, for me personally, there's some design decisions that kind of stop it from being anything more than that. Instead, it's kind of like the cool little middle child that does its own thing with its quirky take on a dark atmosphere, but it's not a game like Bowser's Inside Story or Superstar Saga that keep me wanting to come back time and time again. What about you though? What are your thoughts on Mario and Luigi Partners in Time? Is it a game that is better than what I implied in this video? Is it worse? Or is there anything that I forgot to mention? If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like and subscribe, as that is the best way to support the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, peace out.